Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Mike Greene has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Mike.
Morning, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Looking forward to hearing your story. Some of the audience may know who you are and read the things that you've written, but for those that don't, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so flash run through, grew up in poverty, got careers, did well in careers, started my own business, failed my own business, became bankrupt and homeless, built a global business, sold it after Secret Millionaire, and since then I've been building lots of properties and mentoring lots of businesses.
Love that summary, which we're going to delve into the detail later on. One thing that's really interesting when our guests come on the show, obviously you've been a successful businessman for a period of time and all those journeys you've been on. But when you're not working, what is it you do to switch off or just have me time?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm on a rowing challenge. I was in the gym this morning. I do that. Over Christmas I wrote a novel. I'm rereading through and doing a sweep to refine and improve that. I like cycling on a Sunday. It's quite a funny eclectic mix. I go out with a lord and a judge and a mate, and we stop for a cider and a coffee on the way through. So a number of things, but to be honest, I quite like getting shit done. And people talk about life balance, but that's not a balance that everyone should aim for. The balance is individual. And so I retired for 9 months in 2012 after selling all my businesses at 46. It drove me crazy, my wife crazy, my kids crazy. And I now know that I'll work till I die, and I love it. So to me, kind of work and play and work and personal and family kind of all merge into one.
I agree. And we'll come back later about that importance of actually having the stuff that is for you to enable you to recharge those batteries to be in service of others when we're working. So excellent. Thank you for that intro. So let's go way back, because you talked about obviously growing up in poverty as I did as well. So just paint a picture for the audience about what childhood was like for you.
Yeah, so mum and dad, auntie and uncle, nan and granddad, 3 caravans in a row, grew up in a caravan, not a gypsy caravan, although I had gypsy mates. They're an incredible culture of closeness and that, and they get a bad rap. And actually, it always strikes me, having built a business with Alfie Best, the gypsy billionaire, how much we still think it's okay to be prejudiced against gypsies, but no one else, kind of thing. So that was that. We moved down to Luton. My mum my dad had a job, and I shared a bed with 2 brothers until I was 11. Moving back to Peterborough, people say a bedroom, no, a bed. I was really excited to come back to Peterborough, partly because it's where 5 generations of my family are, but also I would get my own bed, still in the same bedroom. But little things made a big difference then. I went to school. It was a pretty rubbish school in Caddington near Luton, but also in Peterborough. It was once called a demonised depository for social waste. And I met the eminent Cambridge psychologist that wrote that report years later when I got a doctorate. So I had a few choice words to say to her. But it was poverty. It was tough. My stepdad was violent and abusive, and I've been knocked out by him, hit by him. But you look back and people say, how could you do that? It's normal when you're in it. You don't know any different. And so people said it must be terrible. Do you know what? Mostly we were happy. My mum filled our bellies, even if it was with bread and potatoes and things, because they could fill you up cheaply, and we were close. It wasn't until I got comparisons in school and later that I realized, shit, that's not a way to grow up.
So just talk a little bit, because I hear what you're saying about when we're in it, it's normalized, and I've got similar things to draw upon. But back then, when you look at it now, what were you already developing during those years because of that environment that you were in, that was the sort of survival, mechanism that was coming out for you right then?
Yeah. So as I built my business around the world, it was a research business, and to make better insight from the research, it was necessary to understand how companies could use it. So I became a behavioral profiler to better interpret that data. And in doing so, it made me realize a lot about myself, if you like. And I was a good behavioral profile. I could already read people from their level of eye contact to the way they moved, to the colors they wore, to how they spoke. And I just naturally read them. But it wasn't until I started doing all the behavioral profiling that I realized that that grew out of trauma. So all children are behavioral profilers. They don't listen, they listen to the whole body. They're watching. In fact, if you talk to a toddler and you're looking away while you're talking, they will turn your face because they want to read you as such. Now, I realized that a lot of children lose that. They start to only listen, not read people. But because my stepfather was violent and aggressive and would drink, from the moment the door handle went, I was like alert. I was listening for the amount of breath. Was his breathing heavy? Did he slam the door? Did he throw his keys down? What were his first words to my mum? So I could look at it and look for pity or be negative. And I realized he kept me, made me an incredible behavioral profiler. My ability to read people, even now, but it was a fight or flight mode. There's no doubt about it. And then in school, because we were scruffy kids, because we'd get our clothes from jumble sales, because cheap, now car boot sales, aren't they? But we'd get bullied there, but we sort of came together as a little pack. When I looked back as I got older, I realized it served me as well as hurt me. And actually, would I change a day? Not a single day, because much of the success or comfort or confidence I have today all comes from that upbringing, from the pain and the pleasure, the kind of feeling scared, because I'm sure I was a little guy back then. I used to say, and he'd hit me again, but I'd say to my stepfather, "You're getting older and weaker. I'm getting older and stronger. I am going to kill you one day." And I meant that with every cell in my body. Now, he got cancer and went down to 6 stone and sort of said sorry in his own way. But I started to see that he wasn't, he grew up in a very violent environment. That was his go-to place. That was all he knew. And I realized, and it's why I became a doctor of education and spoke at many schools, that you can't force people to change. You got to educate people to change. And that's why much of my last couple of decades has been around mentoring, around understanding psychology, behavior, how to educate people out. And then my own podcast, Success is a System, has been with people who have come from rags to riches, have overcome real challenges to become successful. What were the systems, behaviors, approaches that they used to overcome that can be replicated by anybody if they see it as a system and do the same things?
Love it. And I want to come back to that later on, because obviously you were blessed, as I have been, in terms of having some kind of environment where we could discover what happened to in our childhood, maybe was something different to other people in that sense. So let's just move a little bit forward and maybe latter school years, so late teenage years.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're starting to get bigger and stronger around your stepdad. Just talk us about that pivotal point, about what decisions you made in life around that.
So I don't know what it was. There was a lot of violence in our family. My younger brother was a street fighter for money. My sister got 9 years in jail for stabbing a guy and nearly killing him. But for some reason, I always went more to the head than the hands. I mean, we all did boxing and fighting and stuff like that. But I kind of wanted to read and I wanted to be successful. And I'd say things to my mum like, "One day, mum, I'm going to buy you a house." And I think that whether I realized it or not, that wanting to grow, wanting to learn, wanting to read, wanting to develop, and wanting to get away from the family, from the city, because I thought that geography would make it all right. It wasn't until I was like in Australia, New Zealand, America, that I realized, and we had our oldest daughter 27 years ago, the only place I wanted to be the minute we had her was back where we had roots, we had support, we had connection. And it was a real commitment to be a part of the solution rather than run away from the problem. So, but as a teenager, I was really driven. And there was a moment, and as I'm talking to you, I've got a picture up on the wall of Sid Vicious, the Sex Pistols. And I've also got Gandhi, different people who inspire me, Margaret Thatcher. But the Sid Vicious thing is, as a teenager, I was a punk rocker, green hair, bondage trousers, all that sort of stuff. And it was a bit anti-establishment. And I loved it because it's like up yours kind of thing. But what happened was, when I was about 13, 14, just going into O-levels, as they were then, GCSEs, I had a fight during the summer holiday with my best mate, Stuart. I won't say his last name, but we had this scrap over an argument, and it meant that for the last 4 weeks of the summer holiday, I was on my own. He was like my only mate, really. And I just started to read, and there were these like cards that you could get that would give you the key points in maths and English and different stuff. And I started to read them, and I thought, I don't know what it was. It was a trigger that made me want to be better. And I'd read a quote that said, you can get better or you can get bitter. And I studied for 4 weeks, and I was locked myself away, and the family all thought I was stupid and what have you. But reality is I was lonely. I didn't know what else to do. And that, when I went back to school after some holiday, people, and the more important thing was girls, said, "Oh, you seem to have changed. You seem much nicer." And so it was a kind of endorsement of this new behavior, which made me want to keep it up, made me want to do it more. Teachers said, "Oh, what happened? You're kind of doing better. You're more focused." And if we can give people a little bit of encouragement, it doesn't have to be massive. But that then changed my last 2 years at school. Now, it was still a crap school, which closed after a little while. But as I said, it was called a demonized depository of social waste. But I got 8 O levels, no A's, just B's and C's. But it was enough to put me in the sort of top quartile of that particular school. And then I could look at banking as an option. Actually, I went into retail because I was doing a paper round Saturday job and I loved it, having had the comparison to banking, which bored shitless. But like, if I look back, the key points were going from sort of anger to determination, in a little bit of recognition. And about the same time, I was doing the paper round, and the manager of the Martin's newsagent said, "Listen, son, go out and get yourself a shirt and a tie." And I said, "Well, why?" He said, I want you to do a Saturday job. You'll be good at that." Suddenly a male role model, it's only a bloody newsagent manager, but said, "I think you'll be good at that." It's like, oh, a bit of belief. And that's why I speak at a lot of schools. If we only understood the power of someone putting a hand on your shoulder and saying, "You got this, you can do this, I believe in you," it transforms life.
I agree. So why don't we might take this, if it's okay with you, almost by decades, because we're not getting any younger, you and I. So why don't we look at those inflection points in maybe once you'd actually decided that's what you were going to do and you decided on retail. So in your teas, what was happening for you in terms of how you were channeling, this drive that you had, and what were some of the challenges you were facing at that age?
Yeah, so I was really driven. I would work insanely hard. And that sort of came from youth as well, because there was never enough money. We were doing morning paper rounds, afternoon paper rounds, washing cars, potato picking, gardening, any job. And so I was never afraid of hard work. And I never understood that you can earn more with your sort of head than you can your hands. And so it was all about doing shit as opposed to planning and thinking and so on. So in retail, I worked really hard. I went from being assistant manager to area manager to regional manager to then new store development and so on. I was going all around the country, opening different shops for different companies and so on. And then I decided, I'm doing all this for other people, I'm going to do it myself. And this was about 23. And I got a pizza franchise because that was growing at the time. And I did really well. I went from one store up in Manchester to a second to a third, from between Manchester and Blackpool. And I knew, even as I was going to a second and third, that I was getting stretched financially mostly, and 70% of businesses that go bust because of lack of cash, not lack of ability or lack of a good product or so on, or potential customers. It's cash that kills you. But the franchisor at the time said, "Don't worry, I'll give you a rent holiday, on the new ones. You're doing really good. You can smash this." And I don't blame him, but cash got tight for him. So he called in the rent. I said, "But you said you'd give me a hut." Called it in. He then took over the 3 franchises because he could, because, he in effect owned it. And in a week, we went bust. I came back to the house. I'd bought a house even at that age, and I was renting it out in Peterborough. And I went round to the house. I'd said to Jules, "We'll live with Mum for a little while. And then, we can move back in there at the end of this tenancy agreement." Anyway, I go around there. The door's got the bloody yellow police thing across it, and they burnt the house out. And so it's like, in 1 week, we lost the business, lost all income, and I had to hand the keys back into my house, Norwich and Peter Building Society. I thought, Jesus Christ. So we were homeless and bankrupt. And I rang a mate and told him, who was in the same sort of industry. And he said, he's my best mate, my best man, and still see him today. In fact, we're away with him next month on holiday. He said, "Mickey, let me tell you this. When the shit hits the fan, you'll count your friends on one hand. And then he said, because the rats leave a sinking ship, he said, but you'll realize that you only need a handful of friends. He said, in fact, if you can find one good friend every decade, you are truly blessed. And I often say to my kids, you don't need all these hundreds of Facebook friends. They're flim-flam, they're flaky. They'll never be there for you. Stick to the good friends kind of thing. Anyway, we went past and we were delivering pizzas for him, and we rented a flat, and we had this mini with a hole in. I could see the road going under it, living literally hand to mouth, setting goals like, if we can get some extra hours this week, we'll buy a Chinese takeaway on Friday. I mean, little goals, but nonetheless, they were goals that we were aiming for to try and get. And because we had nothing, one day I remember thinking, I'm bored, shit this in the mornings, because the pizza business was kind of lunchtime through evening. And I thought, I'll go to the library and find something to read. I'm bored. Anyway, I go to the library, and I'd obviously been to libraries in school and what have you. And suddenly, as I'm walking through the library, I see this self-development, self-help section. I never noticed that before, kind of. And then I saw Richard Branson, and I thought, oh, I like Branson. I heard about him. He was a millionaire then, not a billionaire. But anyway, I pick up the book, and it was like failure after failure after failure. And there was a sudden realization that you can fail, but that doesn't make you a failure. You can have failures, but it doesn't make you a failure. And he talked about things like, unless you choose to stay in that failure. If you take it as a learning and you see it as a waypoint towards your destination, it's not your destination. It's just something that happens on the way. It can strengthen you. It can grow you. And so I started to read, and I read over a decade, hundreds of books. Literally, I was reading all the time, biographies, management books, and so on. And then I got back into corporate, got jobs, and that's where I did the store opening again for lots of companies. And then I started speaking at conferences, the Institute of Grocery Distribution, became head of shops marketing for ConocoJet in the UK, running 600 dealer sites and 200 company-owned stores, and then speaking at more. And I realized that I could kind of, this behavioral piece that come from my early trauma, that I could read people, I could read shoppers. And one of the companies I got in to give us some of this data research on it was a company called HIM, Harris International Marketing. And I got on really well with Jeff, and he was an older guy, probably about my age now. And he would tell us the data, and I think, this isn't like an opinion. This is like real. This is like fact. And he said, we're a fact-based consultancy, not an opinion-based consultancy. He said many people can work at Unilever or Tesco's and say, I'm a director, but they've only worked at Unilever or Tesco's, and they have an opinion. And he said, opinions are like arseholes. Everyone's got one, but most are full of shit. He said, you've got to be able to validate it with the numbers. And it's amazing. He said, why don't you come work for me? Because I'd pick him up on points. He said, that's a good point. Because he'd say, last year 19% of your shoppers did this, and now it's 17. I said, is that good or bad? What does that mean? What do we need to do? And long and short was it is, I said, I'm only going to come if I can buy the business off of you. And then a guy called Tom and I bought it, grew it massively, grew it internationally. And it was just that change. But it all sprung from the tough upbringing, the bankruptcy, the homelessness, the desire, and then the realization that you could grow yourself out of a problem. But also, and I spoke about this at a conference just last week, if you're waiting for interest rates, if you're waiting for weather, if you're waiting for a good team, if you're waiting for it to be the right time with your partner or kids, or if you're waiting for a good government, if I can be blunt, you are fucked. They're going to be good and bad at different points, whatever color, whatever party. But it's got to be about you. Only you can navigate your future, plan your future, and be the leader that will show people where we're going rather than tell them where we're going. And I've built different businesses and hundreds of properties, and we still do that today. And I mentor 30 to 50 businesses in any month. But it's often about that mindset, that plan, that detail, where are you, where you're going, what have we got to do to get from where you are to where you want to be? And it's then, and how do we need to grow? Because you are where you are based on what you know, what you do, and your mindset, in effect. I've got a system that works. And that system was taught to me by the head of corporate restructuring for KPMG, who in the 90s were charging £18,000 a day to companies like Sainsbury's and B&Q and whatever. But because I helped him with a business called Circle K to turn it from red to black to sell to co-op, he mentored me for free. But he was a tough mentor and would make me do stuff that forced me to grow. Not just in reading books and that, but go and climb a mountain, Mike. Why would I do that? The business is growing like crazy. I ain't got time to climb mountains. Do it or find another fucking mentor. Oh, okay, Stuart, because I didn't want to lose him, kind of thing. Or run a marathon. I said, have you seen these legs? I'm not built for running marathons, kind of thing. And he would just force me to do it because he knew that whether it was training for an hour a day, I'd be out of my head. I wouldn't be in the office, and I'd be thinking as I was running, kind of thing. And then when you get the win and you think, wow, I'm not really built for marathons, but I did it anyway, and I did it quicker than I thought. And, what started as grueling and enduring the pain ended up as enjoying the run and then celebrating the win. And so all these things come together, but people think it's about having a great product. If that was true, how the hell is Coca-Cola the biggest drinks company? Sugar, shitty water. We used to use it to clean pipes in retail. How is McDonald's the biggest restaurant chain in the world if it's about the product or the service? It's about the best known product or service, or the most consistent product or service. So we come back to systems. Success is a system, not a person, not a behavior, although behaviors help, but it's about the systems that turn, whether it's Alfie Best from a gypsy born in a lay-by in Leicestershire to being worth 1.2 billion, or Charlie Mullins never took an exam, let alone passed any, at 15 became a plumber, sold for 146 million. There were systems and behaviors that they didn't even realize were systems, but they were the way they dealt with things. And so I spent my life sort of extracting that, encapsulating it, and then spreading it to other people.
Love it. So I want to really focus on a couple of things here in terms of that journey. So the first is, so the audience understands this, from what we've heard from you so far, there's obviously this drive to achieve success, even when obviously you're down and it's about where do we go next and preparing to fail. But what was the overall goal back then, particularly in your 20s? What was the dream, if you like, or was it a case of we've just got to get through this and see where we go?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said drive as opposed to a need, because often if it's a need, I mean, if people say in different decades, why, you did all right at school relative to the rest of your family, what would do that? Well, starvation would make you go to school. If it's the only place I can get a cooked meal, I'll go to school for it. And my mum would send us because we'd get a cooked meal. So in the earlier years, it was literally about being fed. I wasn't going to learn. I didn't like the teachers as such back then. By the time it was 20s, it was proving that I wasn't a failure, if you like. And then 20s into this, it was seeing my mum get old and not being able to look after herself as much, not being able to provide for herself as much. So it was then not about being driven for me, it was about being driven for her, kind of thing. And I often say to people, if you can't do it for yourself, because people say, I don't need millions of pounds, or I don't need that. I say, you selfish bastard, why don't you do it for some other people? What about the neighbour's kid that you can pay for an operation? What if your kid needs it? And one of my kids needed a 52 grand operation once, and I could pay for it on the Thursday and get her operated on the Tuesday. Boom, no problem at all. Don't be selfish. What if that happens and you need to do it? Wouldn't you like to be able to do it? So, and people will do it more for others, their kids, their parents, their community, than they will themselves. And so often the biggest motivations we can encapsulate are less selfish. I can say, I want a Ferrari. But the minute I get tired or ill, I don't need a Ferrari. My Fiat's all right. Nothing wrong with Fiats, by the way. It was from hunger to kind of proving I wasn't a failure, to being able to kind of give my mum that certainty, that security, that safety net, to then with Jules, and we had kids, and it's like, I want a legacy. I want to leave something that makes a difference, not just to my own kids, but that's, I started to write the books and articles and speak at events, and realized that I had an ability to tell stories. It's not like academic university academics, but it's street smarts and storytelling. And people will say, you wouldn't know how much that helped me. And I see businesses turn around and so on. So the reason drive rather than need is important to me is I haven't needed money for 20 years. I mean, probably before that, but that money thing got ticked a long, long time away, and we've given over $1 million to charity. And I still spend 2 days a week of my time every week voluntarily as a deputy lieutenant, as an ambassador for Cambridge Children's Hospital, as a chair for Chamber of Commerce, and speaking at different schools. That need finished a long time ago. It's now definitely a drive, and I'm driven to give more back. And that sounds like, oh, it's very charitable. No, it feeds me. I do believe that it's like priming the pump in the old-fashioned pumps. It's this kind of cork bung that's in the pipe, and it shrinks when it dries out. And if you only had a gallon of water, would you keep that to drink, or would you be willing to put that into expanding the bung so that it would then work like a vacuum and suck the water up and you'd have endless water? But most people are so focused on keeping what they got that they're not willing to invest some or all of it to have abundance forever. That is there, and it is there for everyone. I don't say it in any religious sense, but I've spent enough time with billionaires, millionaires, decamillionaires, centimillionaires, experts to know that people from all backgrounds, Oprah Winfrey got raped by an uncle, got pregnant at 14 by him, lost the baby, pregnant again because she was sexually active at 16, became the first female billionaire, the first black billionaire, the first female anchor on a news channel and stuff. And, John Paul Deloria, Paul Mitchell hair care, a tramp living on the street. Someone cut his hair. It gave him his dignity back. And he realized that just cutting hair can make someone feel good. So he got job sweeping up and begged enough to clean himself up to get the job, and then got into hair care. Now he's a billionaire. And I can go on and on and on and on about when people get this drive, this determination, this outside of themselves passion. If you find your passion, you find your purpose, you find your passion. But when they find that, it is a every waking minute drive.
I've got two more areas to cover, and fairly deep subjects, so we've got plenty of time to do that. The first is with the audience that have been listening to this and relate to the fact about the childhood, and both you and I work with lots of people that, have those difficult times when they're younger. Just explain what particular elements during your career have you found, that what drove you from that survival type mechanism, if you like, sometimes got in the way in terms of the leadership that's required at that very moment in your business?
So there was a point. So I've been a behavioral profiler. I'm 61. I've been a behavioral profiler for about 20 years. And as I said, I did that just to functional, will help my analysis and data for the business. But I started to look back and realize how much that drove me. And I realized until that point, even though I'd had some great success, I was like forcing stuff. It's like, I'll make people do it. I was like happy to kind of blow up at people. And I find that you find the people a bit like Alan Sugar that will put up with your shit. But I realized that, oh my God, there's a different approach to this. If you look at DISC profiling, DISC, and you Google that or ask chat to explain that. And if it's not DISC, it's red, green, yellow, blue, or it's a monkey, a lion, an elephant, and a dolphin. It's the same 4 core behaviors, and there's subsets below it. But it made me realize that behavior is set by the age of 7. And if I'm trying to force them to be like me, to see what I see, to be what I wanted them to be, they were set by the age of 7. So I can use emotional intelligence to work with my behavior in harmony with their behavior, to give them a working environment and a way to achieve what they want, but also for me to do mine. And it transformed everything, because I started meeting people at their learning behavior, at their need state, towards goals that made them feel successful. And from that point on, there was a real transition, and it's the 5 years that really grew our business massively internationally and so on. And ever since, when I meet someone from the hand, as I said earlier, from the handshake to the eye contact to boom, I've read them in about a minute. I then can adapt or evolve or mirror my behavior, not to manipulate them, but to connect enough that we properly connect. And if you can connect with someone, you can properly converse. If you can converse, you can convert them to a way of thinking or get them to where you need to get them. Now, if you do that with self-serving kind of intent, it often doesn't work. But if you genuinely, and a word I use a lot in business and mentoring is mutual. If we're going to negotiate something, I want to get the best bloody deal for me. If I say it's got to be mutual, I've got to feel like I got what I need. You got to feel like you got what you need. And if we both feel, we might have given a little bit or given in different areas, but if it's mutual, it can be a good negotiation without screwing somebody, if you like. Behaviorally, I'm passionate about that. And I still think today, and I've lobbied it a lot with schools, is that behavioral profiling should be taught from the age of about 10 or 12. I think it would stop a lot of bullying, because a lot of bullying comes from wanting people to be more like you and not liking people who aren't like you, whether that's religion, culture, they're a geek, I'm a cool, or whatever. The bullying comes out of the difference. If we help people understand that we're all different and that's okay, we're all different, but we can be complementarily different. And actually, the most successful teams have a mixture of behaviors, changes everything. That was the biggest kind of uptick in growth, success, everything else, the behavioral profiling, without a doubt.
I'm a few years behind you, and I know what I'm still working on because we're human beings. So at the age of 61, even though you've had all of that kind of experience and knowledge, what's the one thing that you still need to work on today, Mike?
As I say, I wrote a novel over Christmas and I'm working it, and it's like, it's a Dan Brown-esque type novel, but it's a way of addressing and discussing many of the non-businessy philosophies that I have, whether it's meditation or spirituality or asking the universe, all these things that the minute you say it, some people think fucking freak or whatever, but they kind of all have a bit of a place. And the learning that, I can be in the gym this morning doing all of this, but hydration and sleep are more important than the gym. It's wasted without hydration and sleep. So getting this kind of body mind connection will be my sort of lifetime focus. So understanding that less is more, not just as a cliche statement, being quiet rather than noisy, being on your own rather than in a crowd, this kind of learning and growing from doing less, thinking less, emptying your mind rather than filling your mind, slowing down rather than speeding up. And that is a challenge for me, but I'm getting better every day. But I know that the rest of my life will be about understanding that I can achieve a much more by focused less.
Super. Let's go on to the next topic. I'm very interested in your views on this because if we look at AI now, and AI obviously is all amplified, but I do believe in one thing. AI certainly will accelerate the standardization of gold standard systems and processes. You talked about systems, and that will be across all industries. So if that happens, the only thing we have left are people and the way they show up in relationships with themselves and others. So what's your view around that, linking to what you said before about the importance of self-development for people out there in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is the best thing that has happened in my lifetime. I mean, look, everything that's good brings some bad. Okay, the internet, wow, how incredible, but some people use it in a dark way. Cars going faster and faster, incredible, but they kill people as well. So we've got to embrace change. And I love the Jack Welch quote that if the change outside of your life is greater than the change inside of your life, then you're not going to be happy. Or if the change outside of your business is greater than the change inside of your business, you are going out of business. So it's understanding that change is happening. We can't stop it. Okay. So then we got to look at, can it help me? And, whether it's moving from horses to cars or radio to TV or standard tools to power tools, the people who don't embrace that change get left behind. They just can't compete or keep up. Now, I look at AI, and as a doctor of education and somebody who realizes that we got an increasing number of people on the spectrum. Well, are they increasing? They're probably always on the spectrum. They were just the ones who didn't do well at school or got labeled as disruptive or stupid or whatever. They weren't less able, they were differently abled in that educational learning sense. I think AI, the beauty of it, and I often say to people, schools or businesses, use it as your tutor. Go on and say, hey chat, for the next hour, I want you to be a maths tutor for me. I don't get this shit that they're telling me in school, and I need you to do it in a really dumb way that will teach me it. And we can iterate between each other. Help me understand. And of course, AI, unlike a teacher, is going to never make you feel stupid. It's like a puppy dog. It'll wag its tail at whatever question you ask it, and it'll work at your pace. And if you say, I still don't understand, give me another way to understand that. I spoke at the Association of Colleges and FE governors and so on back in June last year. And I was keynote at the end. I said, look, do you mind me being really honest? Because I'm passionate about education, but I'm not passionate about the way we do it in the UK. Kind of needs to change. And if I look at architecture, God, we've gone from mud huts and straw to building a mile high into the sky, building on the sea kind of thing. In vehicles, we can fly now, for God's sake. Gone from horses to cars to steam to aeroplanes and rockets and so on. Everything's evolved massively over the last couple of hundred years. But teaching, 200 years ago, it was 30 kids sitting in front of a teacher teaching it one-dimensionally to 30 kids that all had different learning styles, but were expected to learn it in his or her style. And it wrote, it's just fucking noise. And it might be too slow for some people, too fast for other people, the wrong way to learn for some people. That cannot work. Now, do I think there's a place for school? Yes, around physicality and socialization. And I think teachers are amazing. If you say to someone, what's your favorite subject in school? They say maths or sport. What made it that? It'll be a teacher they loved, a teacher that made it relatable, a teacher that took the time. But I think teachers can become more about being tutors to what, like, I want you to go off and do 600 words on the Tudor period in history. And you can make it visual or you can make it more verbal, but I want you to come back to me tomorrow. I can go away and I can do that with chat. And then I can sit with them and they say, oh, this is really good. Or what made you do that? And I think we learn more if those teachers become tutors rather than robotic teachers. And I speak to a lot of teachers. They want to teach more individually. They know that Jimmy needs more time and Mary needs extending, but they're not allowed. I mean, literally, they've got a set of criteria and rails and lesson plans they cannot divert from. And so for me, AI is the answer to so much of that, so much of it. And it can help order my mind. If I've got an ADD, ADHD brain, I can just say, and I speak into it. I don't type because it's faster and it's easier. And so I say, hey, chat, right, I want to send an email to Andrew and I want to talk about this and this and this and this. And I need to answer his question about that. And this is what I think about that in terms of answering it. And it can take all of that, my jumbled words, but still my words, still my intent, still my message. And it can put it in a flow that makes it more logical and easy to read for Andrew to understand what I'm trying to say. A lot of businesses and skills are terrified of it, but they either need to change or they'll be changed by it. You know, lawyers, for instance, I've got a lot of mates who are lawyers. I know it's like, oh shit, we used to be able to charge a fortune because we can employ this intern at like 15 quid an hour and charge 50 quid an hour. We can employ this like paralegal at 40 quid an hour and charge 200 quid an hour and so on. All that shit's gone now. You know, if they don't embrace that change and say we're going to be an AI enabled law firm, still with the eyes of experience of a partner or whatever, or a barrister, but we're going to take like 80% of the hours off. The first lawyers to do that are going to clean up against the old ones who are trying to say, oh, you can't trust AI. Stop talking shit. You know, it's like employing for 70 quid or 18 quid the most intelligent student that ever came out of every university on the planet that can access ancient scripts through to yesterday's news, that can put it in any way you want. You can say, I want a 100-word summary, I want a 100,000-word novel. It will help take your thoughts and something into that. Anyone who doesn't embrace it, well, they might as well give up and go and live on a beach in India now.
I agree. So last question for you. 2 sentences, Mike. What is it that is still to achieve for you? You're 61 years old that will still make that impact in the world. What is it you're left to do yet?
I don't think I have to achieve anything, you know, and if I died tomorrow, I'd die happily. I've had a great bloody life. I mean, I've done some incredible things, from mountains to marathons to ocean races to achieving great things in business. But I want to leave a mark. You know, if it's like Stephen Covey said, write a goal for 150 years, you know, and I remember when I got trained by him personally when I was in oil companies, 7 Habits guy. And I wrote that in 150 years, I want one of my kind of great grandchildren to be sitting there in a beautiful garden, beautiful house, and they're all relaxed, it's calm, and they say to their mates, you know, where did your family get their money from? Say, oh, I don't know, but my granddad talks about his great granddad or whatever, and he says that he taught them this planning system to get a goal, to break it down, to simplify things, to understand people and adapt based on their behaviors. And that drives me every day. If I can implant in my family, in other people, this ability to understand you are perfect just as you are, but you could use systems to make you more effective. You don't need to change, but you need to embrace fully who you are and change the systems you're using. If I could leave that mark on 1,000 or 100,000 people, then if I am going to be looking down at some point, I'd look down happily.
Mike, on that note, we'll finish. Thanks very much for being on the show. I've really enjoyed your company today.
My pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.